Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us this truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathemi. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to read through a little bit of the priest portion in the book of Numbers. You know, it was something that kind of came across my mind. And basically, how the children of Israel, you know, would take of when their offerings, their tithes, their offerings, how they basically would take care of the priests, right? And basically how us in this time, you know, us being that sacrifice, you know, sometimes the Lord would have us in situations where, you know, we take care of, you know, either one another, or, you know, sometimes it might be a situation that you might be in where you have to take care or help out, you know, family or whatever, right? You know, us being that essentially that sacrifice, right? You know, because, you know, the when you go into the history, you know, the tribe of Levi, they didn't have that physical, you know, allotment of, you know, of the promised land, right? So essentially, you know, the Lord designed, you know, our priesthood in such a way where, okay, the different tribes would bring their essentially their sacrifices, their offerings, their resources, their tithes to be able their first fruits. You know what I'm saying? Bring all those things to be able to manage and take care of the priests, because their portion was to be able to perform the duties in the tabernacle, right? You know, and which was a very heavy, you know, basically a heavy responsibility, because they were basically trying to understand and teach our people the difference between the things that are clean versus unclean, you know, performing sacrificial duties, burning incense, and so on and so forth, right? So, you know, they had a lot of, you know, essentially responsibility, you know, these priests, right? You know, so, you know, being knowledgeable in the law and stuff like that. So, I kind of wanted to read through this, and, you know, in terms of like, you know, sacrifice, you know, it's something that has been on my mind, because sometimes the Lord would have us in situations where we have to, where we are the sacrifice, right, in these times. But, you know, sometimes we have, you know, in our time, sometimes the Lord will have us in situations where, you know, that sacrificial mindset is basically key, you know what I'm saying, to get through some of those situations too. Because in the world, you know, we're taught in the world to basically be more like me, right? You know, as opposed to be able to be more considerate, right? Denying yourself, right? So I'll start here, and I kind of just want to flow around with this topic, but, you know, Lord's will, this lesson would be edifying, right? So I'm going to read this in the Amplified. This is Numbers chapter 18, verse 8, and it says, the priest portion. It said, then the Lord Yahweh spoke to Aaron, now behold, I, the Lord, have entrusted you with my heave offerings, even all the holy gifts of the Israelites. I have given them to you as a portion, and to your sons as a continual allotment. It says, this shall be yours of the most holy things reserved from the fire, every offering of the people, every great offering, also known as a meat offering. It says, and sin offering and guilt offering, which they shall render, give to me. They shall be holy. They shall be most holy unto you for your sons. And you shall eat it in the most holy thing. Every male of your family shall eat it. It shall be holy unto you. So the different offerings, which is described also, I think, in the book of Leviticus, you know, those offerings, they would actually, that would be also be used, you know, sometimes for some of the offerings, you know, they're like sin offerings, peace offerings, their fat would be basically taken away, right, and burnt, right? But there are certain portions of the sacrifice that we be, the priests would basically eat of, right, to be able to sustain themselves, right? So it says here, this is verse 11, and it says, "This also is yours, the heave offering of their gift, including all the wave offering of the Israelites." It says, "I have given them to you and to your sons and to your daughters with you as a continual allotment. Everyone in your household who is ceremonial clean may eat it." Right? It says here, all the best. Here's what they actually received back in the ancient times, right? So we're going into ancient culture and we're seeing how did this priesthood function? How did this allotment and taking care of the priests, function, that mindset, that mentality, right? Because sometimes I'm really kind of showing the things that are there's nothing new under the sun, right? So just like how you have this happening back in those times, you're happening basically in this times, and the Lord will have us in situations where we have to kind of like, look out for, one another, brethren. Or sometimes it could be maybe you may also sometimes it can also be like a family member as well, because sometimes they may not, I guess, be a believer per se, but they're just pleased to dwell with you, and they have a certain level of respect for you, right? They may not believe everything, such as yourself, what you believe, but you walk in a certain way, right? So it's basically remaining essentially pleasing unto the Lord, right? This is verse 12, and it says, "And all the best of the fresh oil, olive oil, I'm sorry, and all the best of the new wine of the grain, of the first fruits of those which they gave to the Lord Yahweh Bashanel Shai, I have given them to you." Excuse me. And it says, "The first ripe fruits of all that is in the land which they bring unto the Lord shall be yours. Everyone in your household who is ceremonial clean may eat it." It says, "Every devoted thing in Israel, everything that has been promised to the Lord with an oath shall be yours," right? So these are the certain things. They were eating good. They were very well, handsomely, taken care of. Provisions were laid out for them, right? So they didn't have to actually worry about tilling soil or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? So it takes away that I don't want to say that responsibility. They had their responsibility was more dedicated in performing priestly duties, as opposed to worrying about other things. For example, like, okay, where am I going to get the where am I going to get the certain provisions to take care of my household and my family? You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to read an example of this, of how, just to kind of add to the idea of how things were done, in terms of taking care of the priests, right? I want to get just like another quick example of this, of what I just read here in regards to the first fruits, right? Just bear with me 1 second. Let me just look for it. That's Judith. Where is it? This is the book of Tobit, chapter 1, verse 6. And it says, actually, I'll just read verse 1, then I'll jump down to 6. And it says, "This, the book of the words of Tobit, the son of Tobiah, the son of Ananiel, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabriel, of the seed of Asahel, of the tribe of Naphtali." It says, verse 6, "But I alone went often to Jerusalem at the feasts, as it was ordained unto all the people of Israel by an everlasting decree. of having the first fruits and tenths of increase, with that which was first shorn, I gave at an altar to the priests, the children of Aaron. The first tenth part of all increase I gave to the sons of Aaron who ministered. So this is what they're doing, right? Because it's a service. It's a priestly service, right? It's a responsibility or a burden, right? So it says here, who ministered at Jerusalem, another tenth part, which I sold, went away and went and spent it every year at Jerusalem, right? So, this was another, that's also something you'll find in the book of Deuteronomy, the 26th chapter, right? Where you bring the first fruits of your increase, and basically you put it, I believe also, you put it in a basket, and you will be able to give it to the priest to be able to, and this is what they used it for, right? If they were ceremonial clean, then they may eat of it, right? So that's how in the ancient times under Levitical priesthood, this is how they would the priests were basically taken care of. Now, understanding that we don't have those provisions, but sometimes within our own situations, the Lord would have us in situations where you have to sacrifice, basically, right? Um this is Romans 12 and 1 here, and it says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of the Most High, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto the Most High, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what that is good and acceptable and perfect will of the power Yahweh Bashem Shai, right? So, because because we're just transitioning, because during that time you were performing the animal sacrifices, right? The taking away of the fat, the fat being burnt, right? You know what I'm saying? And that was basically your sacrifice. This time, Yahweh Shai, fulfilled that. It did away with that. So we don't do that. Sacrificial, that sacrificial system. We don't perform that any longer, right? So the point is, in this time, we are the sacrifice. That's really the point, and we're not conformed to the ways of this world, right? So the what's very interesting when you think about it, under the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, there was always, when you read about certain of these different sacrifices like sin offerings and peace offerings, I believe guilt offerings as well, there was always fat that was being taken away. Excuse me. Right? So, how much more, when you think about it, if we are the sacrifice, how much more within within ourselves, right? Because sometimes for us, we have tendencies where, are not pleasing, so to speak, right? That are very displeasing. So we can be more profitable and useful to the Lord, by getting rid and discarding some of those tendencies, right? So we're not conformed to the ways of this world, because this world is really and truly ultimately promotes, sin, death, decay, lovers of yourself, and so on and so forth, right? And kind of to segue into my next point, sometimes the Lord would always have us in certain situations where, performing that sacrifice idea, basically to consider, sometimes a situation, for example, sometimes we go through rough times, and we have to be able to we kind of help out one another, but basically exemplifying certain fruits of the spirit, so to speak, right? you know because we're not held to that, that standard, of the technicalities of the law and all that kind of stuff. We can't keep all those laws 100%, right? So there has to be basically a better way, right? How I said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, right? So we don't have to, like, just like what I read about in Tobit, we don't have to do that. We don't have to do all those we don't have to go up to Jerusalem, and what I'm saying, like, imagine having to do that, right? And I think that you had to do that also for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and there was another feast, I think it was Tabernacles, if I'm not mistaken, right, within our culture, right? So we don't have to do all that because of just to show, and this kind of keeps you in mind of also appreciating Yahweh sacrifice, as well, right? But the point is, our minds being transformed. We don't conform our ways to the ways of this world, right? Because we take on and try to exemplify fruits of the spirit, right? so let me let me go back to the book of Tobit real quick. I just wanted to read something that he said. Just as an example, sometimes we run into situations like these, right? This is Tobit chapter 4 verse 5, and it says, "My son, be mindful of the Lord your power all thy days, and let not thy will be set to sin, nor transgress the commandments. Do uprightly all thy life long, and follow not the ways of unrighteousness." And that's what you have in this world, basically. It's just examples of unrighteousness, adultery, you know, um, sin, which is basically transgression of the law, usury, you have, all these kinds of, filthy practices that are basically, oppressing the poor, all these, disobedient to parents and so on and so forth. Like, there's just so much, it's so much within this environment, that the ways of the Lord are truly not honored in this kingdom. Right? So what happens, we conform not to those ways and habits, right? Because what happens when you have a fear of the Lord, it produces an element of like uprightness. So you don't you don't operate on the same frequency as a lot of these people, right? So it says here, where was I? Verse 6, "If thou deal truly, thy doing shall prosperously succeed to thee and all them that live justly. Give alms of thy substance, and when thou givest alms, let not thy eye be envious, neither turn thy face from any poor, and the face of the Most High, Yahweh Bashem El Shai, shall not be turned away from thee. If thou hast abundance, give alms accordingly, but if thou have a little, be not afraid to give according to that little," right? So it might be a situation where, you might have to do that, you might have to, help out, and even that could include a family member also, right? The Lord puts us in situations to exemplify, these different fruits. A good example of this was, if you read in the book of Samuel, was Nabal's wife Abigail, that actually did kindly. She dealt very kindly with David and his men when they needed, some provisions, right? And she made haste, and I think she had like a cluster of grapes. What I'm saying? She did a lot for basically David and his men during that time, right? When Nabal basically kind of refused, to help out David, right? So the Lord put the spirit on her to be able to just intervene, and she, and eventually, the ball was taken out, and essentially, eventually she got a what's the word I'm looking for? She got a husband, right? She got a man of understanding, right? So I guess that's kind of like, that's a good, story to read, for a sister, you know, that's listening, right? But it also gives us, also understanding, like, the Lord has us in these different situations sometimes too, to exemplify these different characteristics, right? So it's not like something we just basically read about, you know, we will experience these different things, right? This is verse 9 here. And it says here, for thou layest up a treasure for thyself in the day of necessity, right? And that's really the point, because, there's a time where, like, okay, in Jacob's trouble, we're not going to have access to a lot of the abundance of the different, things that, we're so, basically used to, right? And it's a time where, basically what we're seeing now is like there's a love of many like waxing cold, and you're not we're gonna it's gonna be a time where, like, there's all kinds of judgments going on. So what we need basically a lawyer, an advocate, to be able to defend us, in those times, right? Because the scriptures say that, righteousness, would deliver from death, right? So how much more, by us doing these things, you know the Lord remembering us, basically, like, it's like a cash in on your investment. Basically, you invest, think of it like, excuse me, think of it as an investment, like, situations, in those kinds of situations, you're really going to need a cash in on your investment. But, what our people invest in really is like a bunch of wickedness, man. They just sow wickedness, right? And their investment is more into the ways of this world, thinking that this place is going to continue on for a long time, right? So let me read this last one. Something that Paul said, right? And it keeps you humble too. I'll say that. It keeps you humble, being able to minister, not minister per se, but, like, to help out, in a time of need, right? Because, at all points, we all need it, right? But know who you're doing it to. That's really the point I kind of want to hit as well. 1 Corinthians 13. First Corinthians 13, verse 1, it points in 2, and it says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I have become as a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, right? So, understanding, things that have happened, understanding prophecies that are playing out right now. Like, when you think about it, like, not a lot of people actually really know what's going on in the land is prophecy, right? That's skirmish in the land, is prophecy, right? So, really it's a gift to be able to know and understand these things, right? And it says, continuing on, and it says, and all knowledge, and though I have all faith that could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing, right? So Paul says, like, okay, he's nothing, if he has all these different mysteries and he has not charity, he's it's nothing, right? So, is this something just to, keep in mind, not to neglect the importance of knowing prophecies or breakdowns and so on and so forth, but it kind of just adds to your arsenal and kind of helps you to develop, properly, right? Because you don't want to be like knowing all about prophecy and breakdowns, and then you neglect these different fruits of the spirit, right? Scriptures talk about to put on therefore the elect, right? All those different characteristics, right? So sometimes, like, and it doesn't always feel pleasant, because really it's sacrifice, because sometimes you just want to chill, sometimes you just want to relax, let your belly out, you know what I'm saying? I feel that, but it's always good to remain spiritual when a lot of these situations happen. And what is the fruit or the work when you read about it in Matthew the 7, when Yahushua said that trees known by its fruits. Like, what is the work or the deed that the Lord, okay, what can I actually acquire here, right? So I'll leave the lesson there, but I kind of rambled on quite a bit, but Lord's will, this lesson was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.